Welcome to Interactive Futures and our session called What Skills and Qualifications Do You Need for a Career in Games? So this is obviously an important, if huge, topic to cover at our conference. So we're going to do our very best to give you some great insight today. So if you're making choices in your education soon, and maybe you're thinking about what you want to do, perhaps with an eye on working in the games industry as a future career path, then we can definitely help today. We'll also give you some pointers on the non-educational soft skills that the industry looks for across the board. And finally, we'll cover qualifications and routes into the industry. So some of those are going to be pretty conventional and perhaps seen as the more standard route into, say, some of the tech roles of the industry, but also perhaps some less typical that might surprise and hopefully inspire you. So let's get to it. If you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A tab on Hoover and they'll come through to me as we chat. So first to introductions. My name's Liz Prince. I'm the business manager of Amicus. We're a specialist recruitment company for the games industry. I've been in recruitment since the early 90s, having worked in IT roles, and before that I was a computer science grad. I've worked in games for 16 years and I'm deeply committed to diversity and inclusion across the sector. So I'm working particularly to help inspire women and girls to consider the career paths available, with the ultimate goal of achieving a truly diverse workforce. I'm also a proud ambassador of Special Effect, a charity which uses video games and technology to enhance the quality of life of people with disabilities. So to our panel, Nick.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Harper. I am the studio director of Electric Square. Electric Square Leamington was set up at the start of 2020, about 3 weeks before we went into lockdown, so that was great timing. As for me personally, I have been a game developer for about 25 years. I started off as a game designer working for a company called Psygnosis, Sony, back in the day. My educational background was fairly traditional, really. I did sort of usual school stuff. I actually started to learn to program when I was at school, much to my mum's anxiety. But then I didn't know what to do with my life, so I went and did a law degree. Then I went and became a journalist for a bit. And then off the back of that, I actually got into the games industry. But I think we're going to talk in more detail about those sort of paths later. So I'm a game designer by trade, but my career has led me to running the studio.
Amazing, thank you. So we've got two Chris's on the panel today. So I've got Chris McCarthy.
Oh, hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Chris McCarthy and I am the recruitment manager for Third Kind Games. Third Kind Games are based in Leamington Spa and now been in business for over 4 years, and we've released some games recently, for example, like Blankos, which is one of the world's first blockchain games. Myself, I've worked in recruitment, as you can tell, for several decades. So since before the birth of the internet, which is quite an interesting background to have. And I have a degree in biochemistry. I was born in South Leamington, big Irish family, as a lot of us were in those days. And I'm really keen to contribute to the development of gaming in the future.
Perfect, thank you. And our other Chris Sayers.
My name is Chris Sayers. So I'm a visual effects artist for Mediatonic London, which is part of the Tonic Games group, but I specifically work for the London branch. So I am originally from Southwest Wales, born and bred in the mountains in Wales. And then I studied at university. I studied a drama and acting degree. And then after graduating, I then worked as a recruiter for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. And then over time, I then transitioned into interested in gaming, and then eventually through self-teaching and doing online education instead, I then became a junior VFX artist about 2 years ago now at Mediatonic.
Chris, don't spoil our we've got lots and lots of stuff there, so we're definitely going to talk about your journey into games in a little bit more detail, because I think it's going to be really of interest to people who are listening today. So thank you, it's wonderful. Meg.
Hi, I'm Meg. I'm the recruitment manager for Codemasters in the UK. 3 UK studios under my watch, which is Birmingham, Southam, which is the headquarters close to Leamington Spa, and we've also got Cheshire just up the road. We're all working remotely right now, so my closest co-worker at the moment is Baby Yoda.
Nice, lovely. Oh, thanks very much, everyone. So the first thing I want to talk about today is about skills. So the skills that everybody needs or is thinking about when they're thinking about a career in games. So I think it's difficult to talk about skills without touching a little bit on the job roles in the industry. And definitely in the dev teams, there are some core roles. So, and those have sort of more closely aligned skills. So I wanted to try and start a bit more technical and then move out. So for those core or tech dev roles, what are some of the fundamental skills that someone would need to focus on or that they enjoy for those roles? Can we go back in the same order? Nick, to you first, some of the tech skills.
I would say, the tech skills primarily would be a programmer. Now, there's different routes, obviously, into programming, and there's different roles within programming. You can be very tech, like engine programmers, or you can be more gameplay programmers, or you could be systems or online and so on. So I won't talk the specifics about that. I think if you have an interest in programming, you will probably know about it already. I wrote my first game when I was 11. Which was in the 80s, and it was rubbish. But it doesn't matter. The point was I was interested in programming. It was awful. Yeah. It was basically a dot following another dot around the screen. And I was really excited about the fact that I could move a dot and another dot could follow me. But the point is, I was excited about the fact that I could create something and I could do something technical to make that happen on the screen. So I think if you are interested in that sort of thing, you are probably already doing it in some form of some capacity at school, in your school studies or in your spare time. You might be creating stuff in Roblox and so on. Now, in terms of what do we look for in the games industry, it's probably the most degree related job, being a programmer, I would say. Yeah. We're looking for people with either computer science backgrounds or mathematics backgrounds or a programming sort of degree of some form or other. I think that's fair to say. If you want to talk about art and the technical requirements for art, I would probably suggest Chris or one of the other guys could probably talk in more detail about that.
Absolutely. Chris Sayers, do you want to have a think about art with us there? I think in the same vein, what sort of skills are the games industry looking for when we talk about art?
I mean, specifically for art, I think, interestingly, one of the most important things I'd imagine is actually the ability to be able to be critical of things. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean being mean about things and being harsh on yourself and others, but it's more so about being able to look at something and think, is that real? Like, is that really what it would look like? Does that feel like what it would really look like? Like, if I'm creating something myself, and I'm trying to use based on a reference, is it sufficiently accurate to what I'm trying to do? I mean, just a quick note on the programming side of things, just because VFX does kind of barrier them in the middle. Something that I would something that I think is important to say in general is that although mathematics and physics and science are generally the kinds of routes that people take into programming roles, that's not to say that if you're bad at maths, you can't be a programmer, that kind of thing. So for example, the sciences and maths are really good ways of displaying that you're able to, work logically, work systemically, and go through very process-driven things in an analytical way. But you can be very bad at maths and be a good programmer because luckily computers are very good calculators. So they can, just as a thing, sometimes people think programming, oh, that's a lot of maths, I'm going to be having to do lots of scary high-level maths things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that is going to be all of your role. It's more about the logic side of things. So even if you're logically inclined, programming can be a very appropriate way of funneling that skill set. Nice. Sorry, that was a tangent.
No, not at all. No, I think that's really important. It's something that we talked about a little bit at the conference yesterday, of people not being put off because they don't like maths or science. I think that's really, really important for the games industry. And Meg, did you have anything to add on art or perhaps into design or production?
I mean, I think you've mentioned some of the role families there, and I think it's quite difficult when you're outside the industry to understand what you can do when you're in it. So definitely an understanding of, you've got choices within programming, you've got choices within art, within design. You've also got things that follow the creative development life cycle, which always starts with ideas and concept phases, and then it runs through processes and iterations, problem solving, creativity and ideas, and then eventually coming up with the actual product. The person who would steer all that and make sure things were happening at the right time, in the right place, and to the right budget would be a producer, aka project manager in most other industries. So, and then by the end of the process, of course, you have to test everything. So you've got quality assurance, and you've got people who are very rigorous about, does this game play correctly? Is it working? Are there any bugs in it, etc.? I think we'll get a bit irritated when there's bugs or lags or problems in the game. So, yeah, sorry, what was your original question? I've forgotten now.
No, it's fine. We were thinking about skills, really. So I mean, the things that come to mind when I think about skills that underpin the development part of the games industry, things like C++, C#, there are some engines out there, aren't there, that, are free for people to actually get their hands on, potentially, things like Unity. So I definitely just want to sort of pull out any technical skills that people might be thinking, I'm quite a techie person, or perhaps I'm definitely into my art. What are some of those skills? Chris McCarthy, have you anything to add to that conversation before we move on?
I mean, definitely. And obviously, we've talked about programmers. You've mentioned C++, etc. Unity. Programmers are a huge core of any business in the gaming industry today.
Yeah.
And as Chris said, they tend to have, they have different backgrounds, but obviously tends to be associated with maths, physics, logical thinking, etc. But we like programmers that can actually talk and collaborate with other people. That's very important. And they do tend to be graduates. But I think sometimes when people look at an IT organization and technology, there's also other technical professions. So for people coming into gaming, the opportunities today also exist for somebody who's an accountant who may have gone to do a degree, has then become ACA, CIMA qualified, similar with HR, degree, and then CIPD. There is this huge back office element. There are still technical professions where you can support the game industry. And imagine that, being an accountant and actually associated with something like Codemasters, etc. The opportunities and just the interest and the environment that you work in, your dinner parties are always going to be much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just thinking about, and Chris, you started touching on this with your own history. How can people get into some of these tech skills when they're at home, or perhaps, they're a student, or frankly, we're in a pandemic and in lockdown? What can people do at home to start looking at those tech skills?
So for me personally, the place where I started everything was just on YouTube. And it seems kind of obvious, but that like there is a lot on YouTube that you can learn from. That, I mean, some of it isn't necessarily easy to find, and it isn't maybe the best taught because obviously it's not structured and formatted in a way which is like a I don't know, a syllabus basically. But I mean, when I started, I began with just the Unity website because, I mean, like you mentioned before, there's basically got two kind of schools of entry thought, which is Unity or Unreal. And those are basically where you can begin as a self-taught game developer. I personally think that the documentation and entry route in for Unity is a little bit more user-friendly, just because of the fact that Unity's documentation is fantastic. They have so much on their website, and they have fully guided tutorials on YouTube series, like from the very thing of opening Unity for the first time and what do all the buttons do, where are the menus, and then all the way to writing your first scripts and coding in C#, which C# is a little bit friendlier as a coding language in general than, say, C++, which is a bit more tech heavy and a bit more opaque. So you've got websites like Code Academy, which are great for like introduction to Python scripting, which then can lead into either JavaScript or C# itself. Then you have Unreal also has a lot of YouTube series stuff as well for like how to get started in their visual blueprinting. So they have visual scripting things where you don't even actually need to necessarily learn how to code in the, in lines of code. You can use completely visual ways. So maybe if you're someone who's more artist like inclined and you prefer the visual element of it, you can script complete games using these node-based systems, which are much easier to get into, and the documentation is really up to date. Like there are entire games. The most recent Borderlands 3 was originally prototyped in pure visual scripting and it had no code base, but which is an interesting way to get into those kinds of skills.
But I think thinking back to what Nick was saying about when he was, I can't remember how old you said, Nick, 11 or 12, when you were chasing your things around the screen. I think if people are interested these days in, forgive me, these days in that sort of thing, Nick, then there are accessible things that the kids can get into, which perhaps weren't around in the 80s.
I think so. I mean, you've got, like Chris said, you've got Unity. If you've got a computer, you can download it. I mean, you probably have to have a fairly decently powerful computer, but you can download it. It's free. There's loads of things on the internet, YouTube, there's Udemy, all those sort of things that you can start to do. It isn't going to be an overnight thing. It takes a long time to get your head around it. So if you've got perseverance, which is actually a key quality that people will look for in job applicants anyway, it's great. But, if you don't have access to that, you can make stuff in Roblox, maybe. Yeah. In fact, some people, it's their career. Actually, they make games in Roblox and they make a fortune out of it. There's Dreams, which is a PS4, PS5 game that I've never used it, so I don't know what it's like, but that's a creation tool as well. And you can make games and stuff in that. The point is there's lots of opportunities to show your creativity and have a creative outlet, which you can then actually use to demonstrate that to a potential employer, even if you don't have a degree or whatever it happens to be. And with things like mobile games, you can get on the App Store. It's a bit harder on iPhone than it is on Android, but you can write a game and publish it on the App Store just from your bedroom. You don't have to be working at a big company. There's loads of little indie people that do that, bedroom coders. It's the kind of foundation of the British games industry anyway. And some people making a fortune from doing it that way, and they're teenagers.
That's a really good point, that actually, Nick. Yeah. I think because it depends what kind of studio you've got aspirations to work in. And as Nick said, the barrier to entry for an indie, knock yourself out, make yourself games over the weekend, and apply yourself day after day. When you get to perhaps a AAA developer or the larger studios like Codemasters, I'm speaking for, of course, but, we are a company that develop our own game engines. So Unity and Unreal are they're great, but we actually develop our own engines as well. And that means that people who do happen to be more scientifically minded or on the programming side and want a different kind of challenge. And it's very cerebral, and academia can certainly lead you into that path quite fluidly. But it does mean that the technical challenges there are pretty much, unsurpassed in the industry if you're getting into one of the big devs as well. So it's all about, there's so many different, is it 1,000 games developers in the UK or something? Yeah. And they're very different. They're very different. So it depends on where you actually feel you want to be.
We've, just to let the panel know, so we've got a couple of questions coming through about getting into the industry without degrees. I just want to let the audience know that we are absolutely going to cover the sort of qualifications and getting in. So we'll definitely come to that. So just before we leave the sort of the hard skills, the tech skills, where are a couple of places that you can recommend that people showcase either their code? Obviously, we're talking about maybe making a game there, but what about some art skills or design skills? How can someone get noticed?
I would say, in my opinion, this is something that was really appropriate for me. Was to really get yourself involved in communities that are already doing it. Now, I feel like there is maybe a misconception when people talk about social media and they're like, there's an expectation that you have to be producing content, and that's not necessarily the case. Like, you can learn a lot by just being around people who are better than you. and it's as simple as that. You just, by simply following artists who are very good and looking at their craft and realizing, oh, that's how they do that one thing. You know, there's a tutorial that they have here and there. There's a lot of like knowledge that you can gain from being around those people, whether if that's for art skills, that could be on ArtStation, or on Twitter, or on like Instagram circles of artists. I know for animation, there are animation discords. There's a VFX Discord as well, where basically they're industry professionals, teachers, students, hobbyists, and they post their workflows, their works in progress. And then most of the learning is based on seeing someone doing something and being like, wow, that's really cool. How can I do that myself? And then just asking them, and they'll be like, oh, I did it this way, and learn from that. And then you can showcase your own work and get feedback and get criticism and learn through a community of other artists.
Sounds brilliant. Any other places to add before we move on, Chris McCarthy or Meg? Anywhere else they should showcase?
I think on the programming side, I know that my hiring managers always have a nosy at GitHub. GitHub is a little online community where there's lots of development going on, and I don't understand very much of it, if I'm honest, but there you go. And I think that's quite an important place to go. I think the key that underpins that, to Chris's point there, is getting involved, the community aspect and your level of proactivity. Because one thing the games industry requires of everybody in it is proactivity. It's not somewhere you can sit back. You must bring yourself to the table. Even if you're introverted, you must find a way to express your work. And that's really important. You need to communicate somehow with a community that's going to bring those skills out of you. So that underpins everything.
That's a really brilliant segue, I think, Meg, into the kind of the soft skills. So one of the things that we talked about the other day was the fact that, yes, there are some definite skill sets and qualifications and things that games are interested in, but there are so many fundamental characteristics, I think, when it comes to hiring into games that are about the person themselves. So let's just give the audience a flavour of that. So it's things that they can focus on. Chris McCarthy, have you got some thoughts?
In terms of the games, I'm just going to talk about very quickly. Gamers tend to be very entrepreneurial as well, but just bringing it back to this community aspect, and because we are talking to kids as well from 12 to 18, involve your school, talk to your pupils in your own classes, because we really do want to try and make a difference in the coming years. And we've talked about programmers coming in, the ones that we know are successful today started when they were 11, 12, 13, etc. So if you can build, your own community within a school, talk to your teachers and really try and drive it at that level and share ideas, I think that's really, really important for us all. And then the other areas around the creativity, artistic elements will follow. But I think very much in that sort of community, that's when gaming can really make a difference.
Okay. So Meg, Nick, any of these soft skills, what are you looking for in your teams?
I think, sorry, I'm going to jump in just because I had a thought and it's quite rare. Sorry, Nick. Just following on from Chris McCarthy's point there about engaging with your school, I think that's really key. And you can practice these proactivity skills at home on your Zoom calls with your teachers. Yeah. And they're quite basic, but these fundamentals are really key. So things like get to your lessons on time, show up properly, get dressed, no sitting in your pajamas, have your glass of water and your pen and your pencil ready, and keep your camera on, engage with the people teaching you and ask questions. Don't just use the chat facilities for messing about or a bit of bounce. There may be people on there who can actually answer some good questions. So be productive with that kind of thing. And you can start that at school, because we've all had to learn this, us oldies on here, we've all had to, apart from Chris says, we've had to learn this in the last year with COVID and whatnot. But you've got a great advantage of having the experience of being educated remotely. And that means that your engagement with technology to reach out to people and share ideas is going to be really key. So it's down to you to bring yourself forward and show up for that each time. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. Well, I was sort of trying to gather my thoughts, really. I think we talk a lot in the games industry about this thing called emotional intelligence, right? And empathy. And what that means is I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It's a hard thing to describe it, but it's the ability to understand how people are feeling and how to get on with them, both in the workplace, but also to really empathize with the people who are playing the game. So I was then trying to work out how could I sort of express this to the audience today so they can understand what I mean. Like, if you're playing a game, you'll hopefully, if the game's a good game, you'll have some sort of emotional feeling. If it's anything like my kids who play FIFA a lot, it's mostly anger and frustration. But it could be joy or sadness or whatever it happens to be, right? And the game designers and the programmers and the team have made that game with an intent to make you feel a certain way when you're playing the game. They want you to feel that way. And they're really trying to empathize with you as a consumer at that point in time. So there's a lot of psychology behind it. And all these kind of different soft characteristic skills are really, really important, both in terms of how to think about how other people might be feeling when they're playing your game, because we're all different, right? And we all play games slightly differently. But also, how are you going to get on with different people from different walks of life, from different backgrounds, you know, all sorts of, I mean, we're an unbelievably diverse and inclusive industry, the games industry. We love working with people from all over the world, of all different backgrounds. We love it. We can't get enough of it. But that means that as people who work in there, we have to be able to get on with everyone. So you've got to understand, you know, what's your background, what's going on with you, why are you being like that? And all these skills, I think, are hugely important. And I totally understand it's a bit of a waffly answer, but it really is fundamental, because actually a lot of the technical stuff we can teach you, you know, but if you're enthusiastic and you've got a passion for it and you love it and you can get on with people, you're going to go much, much further.
A long way.
And I think, sorry, I'm really waffling now, but I think that one of the things that really works, I think, for young people is they're so much more aware of social media and all of that stuff and how it all works. And I think think about where we're going to be in 5 years' time, you know, like this time last year, we probably weren't capable of doing these sort of Zoom chats, not only because we were all idiots, but the tech wasn't that great, and it's advanced massively. In 5 years' time, you know, you could probably work anywhere in the world and work for any company, and it would be cool. You could be sitting on the beach working for Codemasters, and they probably, I don't know, Maggie might have an issue with this, but they probably wouldn't mind, because we're totally globalizing the workforce, and in the games industry, because it's really digital, we can do that. So it's cool.
You're right. And do you know what? I need to jump in and mention Slightly Mad Studios there, just as by the by. It's probably less relevant to this particular audience because we don't tend to take on people early in their careers, but Slightly Mad Studios have only ever been remote. So Nick's absolutely right. And literally they have got people all over the world with, and you know, in those lovely backdrops where people are on Venice Beach, they're real, if you're at SMF.
So I think the questions that are coming in are very much about qualifications. So let's move into that for our sort of our last section. I think a number of people are concerned that is the games industry just all about having a degree? So are there college courses that people can attend? And also just kind of what if somebody hasn't got that sort of perhaps that traditional schooling into A-levels, etc. Chris Sayers, we said it, or we touched at the start, that perhaps your journey into the games industry was slightly different. Talk us through that just really briefly, and then we can get into these specifics.
So I had no experience in any kind of game dev skills at all. Like my A-levels were in music, English literature, drama and psychology, and then I did an acting degree, and then I worked as a technology recruiter, and I just happened to hear of what a visual effects artist was, and I was like, that sounds cool, and I just Googled it and found out a bit about what it does and how that it existed in games, and I was like, wait, so it's like an artist, but I'm not really an artist. Like, I've never done art, and it's an animator, but I've never studied animation, but it's a brilliant kind of thing to be able to find a job. You're like, that sounds interesting to me.
So Chris, there's a very specific question here of, do you need a degree in art to become an artist in games?
No.
Okay. Now, exactly. the answer in your experience is no. But just in a nutshell, how did you get in? How did you get that job?
So for me personally, it was not something that just happened overnight. I had to apply at maybe 100 different studios. I think I have a document where I wrote 81 different cover letters, like completely scratch, all bespoke for the job. And the reason, actually, interesting when I got hired, I was going to say it earlier, Nick, you mentioned it, is in my interview, the art director who was interviewing me said, Chris, we've interviewed people that are better than you, but we like you. And ultimately, that was why I was hired. And that's a little humble brag, but I basically just said, I will do anything it takes to get this job. I have spent 6 months teaching myself everything I possibly can, but I just need some help. I just need some help to learn like the proper skills. That's what I need help with. But like in terms of motivation, I have buckets of that. And that was ultimately which got me hired, was the attitude and the willingness to continue to learn and to improve upon myself, because I just wanted to know more things. And ultimately they had someone that could teach me those things. Like you said, you can learn the technical skills, but it's really important that you make sure that people want to work with you, because you're a nice person that can take feedback and is a joy to work with. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. You could be the best programmer in the world, but if no one can stand you and you can't take any feedback on your code, or you're like, I'm just tunnel visioning my own thing, it's got to be a collaboration between the two.
And I think it's an absolutely inspirational story, Chris, because a number of the questions are about, so do I need a degree in art to become an artist in gaming? The answer is no. What avenues would you advise people with no background or education in games to explore to get in the industry? All of these questions are about, is there a specific route? And I think the answer generally is no, but some of the skills and characteristics that you've demonstrated are the most important advice, I think, for these people. Meg, is that something you wanted to pick up on?
Yeah, I think, there's certainly, I think of it in parallel, really. There are the non-traditional, the routes where there's an open door for people like Chris with the personality aspects and the wherewithal to bring things forward that we've sort of discussed here. And clearly people on this panel, Nick and Chris, are demonstrations of getting into the industry without a conventional path. For my part, where I sit in my position at Codemasters, we do tend to look for people, particularly on a larger studio, I think this is true, which is a slightly more conventional career path, which is a university. And what university brings you is the dedicated time to create evidence of what you can do. So the absorption into a really immersive experience that you've dedicated 3 years of your life full time to, art, design, code, or whatever it is, and that you're coming out with a set of skills you understand, whether it's C++ or C# or on the art side, whether it's 3D Studio Max or Maya and other tools. And universities do allow an expression of this. I do know that that's a conventional route and it's not for everybody, but from a large studio perspective, we have to be realistic. And, we can, if I advertise a graduate position, we're likely to get tens, if not hundreds of responses. And we do, we're very grateful for that. But it's so difficult then, how would we decide between 100 people of the similar ilk coming to us? And, naturally, we have to screen people in or out based on some very macro judgments. It's not ideal, but it's just real life in a big studio scenario. So I think there's a couple of options. If you're academic, go for it, go as far as you can and you choose to spend your money that way. If you're not, keep your mind open, but keep your attitude forward. And then you've got to do the things that Chris did and, have that energy about you and that tenacity to keep going. So it depends, really.
I think one of the keys in Chris's story to me is how many applications you made as well. And I think that level of tenacity and willingness and passion are to what Nick was talking about earlier.
I'll just jump in there as well and say that particularly as a young person, I actually found being a young person quite tough. And one of the messages I'd say, learning Chris's lesson, if you like, is don't take it personally. It's not, you're not a failure, right? Chris isn't sitting here talking about his 99 failures. He's talking about the one he got in, and he kept going until he found that one. So keep the faith. It's not a reflection on you. If you keep bringing yourself forward, you will shine. You've just not found your place. I'd like to say that.
Quite interesting, actually, because I was chatting to some of my studio directors before this call to sort of prep myself, actually, and go, well, what am I going to say? Our art director, he applied to loads of companies, and actually it was Codemasters, his first job back in the day. But he got loads and loads of rejections, and now he's a studio art director. Our design director never went to university. And one of the questions that's come up is with ability to code. He can't code a thing. Frankly, the guy's useless, but he's a brilliant game designer, you know, and he's got that ability. And I think a lot of it is, there is a bit of luck. It's got to be said. There's some luck. We're all lucky to be working in this industry because it's awesome. But a lot of it is perseverance, personality, and being able to think. It's being able to show the ability to really think on your feet, I think, and solve problems, because that's what it's all about. We're always constantly trying to go, how do we solve that? How do we make that better? How do we make that game more fun? That game loops really dull, isn't it? How can we enhance that? And so on and so forth. And now, I think what Meg said is true. I think for the larger companies, there is a much more traditional path, I would say, because they have to. How are they going to filter out all these applicants? But the great thing about the games industry is it is huge, and it is full of large to small companies that people can work at. You know, like I said, you could set up a company tomorrow and you could be a game developer and you could have your own business. Now, will it be successful? Not, well, that's up to you. But it doesn't matter, right? Well, at that point, you've got the experience, you can show it, and you can then use that to springboard you to get, if you want, to get a job at maybe a small indie company. You could then use that to get more experience. Then you can move on to bigger, and whatever your career, wherever you want to go. You know, some people love working for huge mega companies like the Ubisofts and the EAs of the world and so on. And some people actually find that they get burnt out from that and they want to go back to working for a smaller company. So you'll end up finding your place in the industry, I think.
Over time, absolutely. Chris McCarthy, there's a question here that I think it's about skills and qualifications required to be a quality assurance tester. I think that's one of the roles that we touched on a little bit at the very start. Have you any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the larger organizations, again, because the gaming world is going to separate, isn't it? You know, larger global studios, and then fortunately good independent creative organizations who are not looking just to get bought in the next decade. And the testing and QA roles tend to be with those larger organizations, and you'll see them. There's if you Google it, have a look through the websites, apply directly, tends to have a graduate, as Meg said, background required. And interest in gaming is obviously it's a great chance to play games and test them at the same time, and that's a really good entry level type role. It's a fairly generic opportunity within gaming, and you could build on through to production. You know, we promoted our QAs internally to production and design, so it brings those opportunities forward in the future. So it's but don't be shy when you look at the websites and career sites for these organisations. You'll see all of these other amazing roles, titles that come through. So be curious. It always pays. It's your career. Be curious and have a good old look around.
So one of the other things that people ask about is kind of crossing from other industries into games. What do you find any other industries particularly interesting? There's a question from someone who's got a film degree. Is that of interest to games? Chris, that's in your wheelhouse, isn't it? Chris Sayers.
Yeah, I think so. So this is something interesting. I mean, just briefly looping back to something that you said, Meg, just to be clear, I'm not against university in any way, shape or form. My route was non-traditional. but there is a lot of value to be taken from having a traditional route, and it absolutely depends on the type of person you are. For example, if you're someone that really thrives in a structured environment, then that might be the best thing for you. But similarly, the reason why I wanted to say, like, of my route specifically is that, I don't know, for people who maybe can't afford to go to university,
Absolutely.
or it's not appropriate, maybe you don't have the time, maybe you're a mature student and you have other commitments and you don't have the time to dedicate to it. That's the only reason why I wanted to specify that there are other routes, but they won't come unless you have the desire to pursue it until it happens, regardless of which way you go. Sorry, to actually answer your real question. In terms of film degrees and things like that, they're definitely very, very useful, because this is something that they can be developed in any degree, whether or not you do English literature or history. It's the skills in which you're developing whilst you're doing them. Now, if you're developing your skill to be analytical and really thoughtful of your work, whether or not that's writing essays, whether that could easily translate into your ability to be a narrative designer, which is writing stories for games. And, how do you present information in a way which an audience wants to hear? Are you someone that studied business studies, and you're really process driven, and that actually might be really good for a systems designer or a game designer or a gameplay designer? It's a lot about the skills in which you've developed and thinking about, okay, in my film degree, what knowledge have I learned and what skills have I developed, and how can they convert and transfer into a game? I don't know, you could be a really good product designer or marketer and think, I'm actually really good at selling things, in which case I could be very good at doing an economy designer or something to do with the in-game currencies and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of crossover in just the skill that you've developed and how that translates into the idea of it being in a game.
I think one of the things that we talked about together this week was actually about pursuing the things that you enjoy in terms of education. And rather than just having a specific job in mind that you happen to have seen because you think that's what you want to be in the games industry, but actually pursue what you enjoy, and then generally there will be a role in games that fits with that, if it, obviously within boundaries. But okay, so we've only got a couple of minutes left together. So if I just wanted to get your final sort of piece of advice. So if someone's making choices in education at the moment, maybe they're thinking that they want to work in the games industry longer term, what's your one piece of advice for them? Nick?
That's a good question. I actually think do what you love. So I kind of skirted around this a little bit at the start of this session, and I did a law degree, not because I really wanted to be a lawyer, frankly. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life when I was young. I loved programming and I loved sort of creating stuff, and I didn't think I was good enough to have a job making games. And actually back then the games industry was much smaller. So I did a law degree just to kind of kick the can down the road, to be perfectly honest. And then it was great. It's like, well, I don't have to find a job. I could just do this for 3 years. And then I went in to do journalism because I didn't know what to do with that. And I wasn't any good at being a lawyer. And then that ironically led me to where I probably should have been all along, which was in game development. And that was because I realized I wanted to just do what I loved. I wanted to pursue what I enjoyed. And, I was kind of a jack of all trades at that point. I was quite good at art. I was quite good at programming. So I got a job as a game designer where I could use all of those little bits of skill to the smaller parts made a stronger whole, And I think my advice is there are so many avenues to get into the industry. And as all the other panelists have said, it's not, obviously there's the traditional things like I'm a programmer and so on, but there's so many other ways to get in that it's really about being passionate. And the best way to do that is just do what you love. Yeah. And that'll lead to just having a great life.
Absolutely. Meg, have you got a piece of advice, a quick one?
Yeah, mine would be, don't be too picky about your dream job. I'd say get your foot in the door and learn it from the inside, and you will find opportunities. So don't be sort of, for want of a better word, snooty if you wanted to be a programmer but you're in QA. It's like, take the job in QA, learn the game from the inside. So yeah, don't be picky, get a way in.
Get in. Chris or Chris?
Well, I would say start early and be collaborative. Share your ideas with your mates, your friends. and that will really help snowball your ideas. Over to you, Chris.
Nice.
I think most important thing is your attitude. Is you have to work hard, and don't think that you are owed anything just because of anything. You really have to try hard. Just because you have a degree doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get hired. You have to have a degree and be really good and be really nice to work with and really try hard. So try not to waste your time. If you've got time that you want to develop yourself or your skills, really use that, because it's super important that you show you really care about improving yourself and want to do better.
Great way of finishing. I do hope that everyone's been able to pick something out from today's discussion and perhaps see that there are so many different skills and lots of routes into the industry, perhaps more conventional and less conventional, but also make you confident that you can make those decisions based on what you enjoy rather than perhaps what you feel you have to do. Definitely in games, your passion will shine through. Be persistent, like Chris was definitely demonstrating to us, and don't give up. So thank you so much to our panelists, to Meg, to Chris and Nick. Thank you to our audience for all of your questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Interactive Futures event. Thanks.